So these guides, along with good process, all of a sudden, high performance is easy.
This rethink towards net zero is rethinking a lot of the traditional building enclosure assemblies and building them better.
I get excited, but I also get depressed. I'm depressed because I'm old. And if I was younger, I would embrace this opportunity for this change. I see the young builders, and to me, I get excited for them.
Howdy.
Howdy, partner. Ready to chit chat?
Yep. I'm going to walk you through Appendix A, which is the material selection appendix of the LEEP guides. The purpose of Appendix A is to put together a list of materials as a starting point to what to look for when you're detailing out your sheathing membranes, your flashing membranes, the sealants, and insulation and tapes. Okay? So when you look at materials under the building code, we are governed by a number of standards. When we're selecting appropriate materials for air barriers or insulation or sealants or tapes, it's important they do their function. Air barrier materials need to stick to each other, and they may be from different suppliers or different manufacturers. And so it's critical to pick sealants and tapes and membranes and things that are all compatible and things that are going to stick and last the life of the building. So when you're looking at where to start, you have a lot of suppliers and manufacturers in Canada that can help you out, but often you're going to be combining above grade to below grade components, and they may not all be from one supplier. And you may not be able to even locally get all these different materials. So the idea with this appendix is we wanted to put together a starting point for sheathing membranes, flashing membranes, sealant and insulation. They're widely available in Canada that you can go to and know that they work. And then with your own experience and mock-ups, can go even further, okay? So in terms of when you're choosing materials, the first thing, durability, right? The air barrier and the materials you're using need to be durable. And so they need to withstand, in case of an air barrier, the air pressures and the pressures that are on the air barrier. If they're exposed to UV, they need to be resistant to UV or have some sort of protection or be covered up. The other aspect to look for is compatibility. A lot of building material components aren't compatible. A good example is bituminous membranes and PVC balcony membranes or roof membranes, for example. Those two membranes don't get along. And so you get chemical incompatibility. And so a lot of these are understood in the industry, or you can do some searching, or you can look in the guide here and understand there's certain products that you shouldn't be mixing together. So the guide here touches on things and materials that are compatible and that aren't. Adhesion. If you're applying all these sealants or tapes as part of your air barrier, it needs to stick. And it needs to stick really well. It needs to stick, for the life of that, that component. So the adhesion, and the best way to look at adhesion is actually doing mock-ups. And so people will often do, like a builder will take some sealant they're planning to use and apply it to the house wrap and all the other materials and make sure that it's going to stick. And what you're looking for with adhesion is you're looking for the material to be very difficult to remove, but also cohesively fail. So where you're actually pulling apart the material rather than having it peel off. Okay. Constructability. Of course, if you're using tapes and sealants and sequencing, applying in cold weather, in rain, and to damp materials, all these things come into play. So the first thing we're going to look at is sheathing membranes. So sheathing membranes have a number of code requirements that are covered here, both be used as an air and a water resistant barrier. So if you're using that sheathing membrane as the air barrier and the water resistant barrier, it needs to be tested and evaluated as such. And in Canada, there's many materials that are available. And so when we look at sheathing membranes, we have non-adhered, so mechanically attached membranes, and then we also have adhered membranes. And so we've given a number of different example products, things like Tyvek house wrap, Vapor Shield, Wrap Shield, Dorkin Delta Vent, Siga Maj Vest, SRP Air Shield, Typar house wrap, and Nova wrap here. These 8 products are a good starting point. There's a lot more that can be used as well. And we collected these materials based on feedback from builders across BC and other parts of Canada where people were looking at already building net zero ready walls. So these assemblies have already been sort of used in those applications. There's lots of other materials you could use, but then these are a good sort of starting point. Also, we have adhered sheet membranes. So adhered sheet membranes are self-adhered membranes that are often used as air and water resistant barrier. Again, 7 materials here that are available pretty widely in Canada that can also satisfy that component. Liquid applied membranes. Liquid applied air and water resistant barrier membranes. Again, there's a number of different chemistries here. Silicones, STPEs, which is silyl terminated polyether, acrylic based, a whole bunch of different liquids there. This is sort of your starting point for a number of different products that are available and work quite well in that application. Moving on now to flashing membranes and tapes. When you look at flashing membranes, membranes and tapes, the key thing that you're relying on here is, air and water tightness again. And so what you're looking at is that membrane to stick, of course, to the substrate and what you're applying it to. And then often in air barriers as part of your continuous, in an air barrier application as part of your continuous air barrier from below grade to above grade walls into your roof. And so you're often transitioning flashing membranes from below grade waterproofing, for example, use a lot of flashing membranes around penetrations and windows. And so what you're looking at there is, adhesion, the workability, how tough that material is and how it's going to stand up to the details. The big thing is, with a lot of these self-adhered membranes and flashing membranes, do they need primers or do they not, or do they not? And so, following the manufacturer's recommendations for that is critical. Example products, Blue Skin, Supremas, Seal Stick, Protector Wraps, Protective Seal, and there's dozens of other peel and stick products that can be used in this application. Tapes. Tapes are used as part of the air and water resistant barrier, a number of tapes. And the key thing with tapes is, understand there's a wide range of different types of tapes. So sheathing tapes, things like tuck tape and Tyvek tape are examples of materials that are, more rigid tapes, but they're really good for sealing up sheathing membranes. As we get into something like a Dow Weathermate, Sega tapes, 3M all-weather tape, or Owens Corning tape, these are more flexible tapes with slightly better adhesion properties than you say with other products, and they're often used for air barrier details where you need a bit more workability, flexibility, and even just a bit of robustness and adhesion. So lots of different tapes, and again, mock-ups and trying different components out there. Next one is sealants. Okay, so with sealants, where you're using sealants and around window perimeters to seal different transitions, you got to find a sealant that's going to stick to that substrate. House wraps, where we have a lot of sealants tie into, are notoriously hard to seal to, and therefore special sealants that have been tailored for house wraps are critical to use. And so what we're looking here is for cohesive adhesion to that substrate. And you can often find this from the manufacturer, but often this is just easy to get some of these sealants that you could be using, and recommend starting point here, and then try them out on your substrate. Build that mock-up, test them out, do the pull testing yourself. So with sealants, it's critical to properly apply them per the manufacturer's recommendations for surface prep, then tool the sealant, proper application of the sealant, and direction that you're applying the sealant is also critical there as well, and of course the compatibility. There are a number of different types of sealants. We've got silicone sealants, polyurethane sealants, and acoustical sealants, and so some starting point here, and there's a whole number of different products. Silicone sealants tend to have the longest service life. They tend to last the longest out of any sealants, just because of the chemistry. And so a silicone sealant are typically used in exterior applications. Polyurethane sealants are good, really good at sticking to at adhesion and cohesion to surfaces, but they don't necessarily last as long and exposed at UV and heat. And so you tend to use those in more protected environments or places that you can replace them. Acoustical sealant, the black sealant you see around with polyethylene, is used for a flexible long-term air barrier seal to transition around polyethylene and other interior details, sometimes also used in the exterior as well. But these are sealants that remain essentially uncured for their life. Insulation. In the other videos, we talked about the different types of insulation. So we've got bats, we got rigid boards, in the rigid boards, we got XPS, EPS, we got rigid mineral wool, we got semi-rigid mineral wool, which is softer density than the rigid. We got fibrous loose blown, so things like cellulose and blown in fiberglass. And then we have spray foam. And spray foam are typically installed by professionals. These are usually 2-component spray foams, closed cell or open cell spray foams. And so again, some starting point there for suppliers in Canada that can help you out. So Appendix A really provides that starting point for a builder to look at, okay, here's my details, here are the materials, here's a material that, you know, other builders have tested and we know likely works in this assembly here. There's lots of other products available in Canada and North America that you can also use. Not to say that these are better than the other ones, these are just a starting point for you to work off of.